Hello everybody, this is Bryce. Today I'm going to be going over a basic setup for drawing and drafting in 3D, and I'll show you a little bit of how I work and a little bit of what I've done, and we'll go from there. So first and foremost, I usually start off with a canvas that's toned, because I think it just looks more professional in the end run. So for doing this, if you don't know how, you start off with a new layer and fill it. I'm going to invert, which is Control I, and then Shift G will switch between. If you notice here, there's the paint bucket and there's the gradient tool. And if you hold Shift and hit the hotkey associated with it, in this case it's G, as you can see there, it'll switch between the two. So I go to gradient, and you notice my gradient is the second type here, foreground to transparent. I like to use that more than anything because it's just easier. First things first, tone the canvas. You'll notice it's too black up there and it's too white down there, so I will instead drag the gradient a little bit off the map, and then I will fade, which is Control Shift and F, and then what that does is the last thing that you did, you can change the opacity of how it's done. So I'll drop that down to like 50. Oop, ignore that. Right, 50. And then we're basically good to go. So yeah, so I'll start off with that, delete the extra one, and then I usually start off with a base grid of some variety. Now to do this, to make a grid, which is really critical for making any kind of drawing that's within perspective, because with this grid in place, I can immediately start sketching and generally speaking know exactly where to put the lines and whatever and stay within perspective. So I can be real sloppy if I want to. So to do this, what we first do is we're going to make a grid. So I'll start a new layer, let's call it grid, and step one is to make 2 lines. Well, really you can do a number of things. You notice I have the rulers turned on, which is again Control R. They're set to, I think, pixels here, but if you set the ruler on and then you click on the ruler bar, you'll drag what's called a guide. And I'm going to put that like right there. Well, I've already got some guides set up here. So essentially I've set the guides to be equidistant apart. And then holding the shift, clicking down and holding shift to lock it in place will follow the guides. And real quick, they don't have to be perfectly the same length. We can clean that up in a moment. And so we've got a few lines. Now to turn off the guides, it's Control semicolon, and then what we'll do from there is we'll use the marquee tool. I used M, and this is a square one, and like anything else, you can switch between the different types by holding Shift and then M. And I will just trim the edges so they're all essentially equidistant. Then I will duplicate the layer by using Control J, and what I'll do then is holding Shift and using the arrow keys, I will scooch over the lines until they're about there. And then once that's been done, and they don't have to be perfect, they just have to generally work, I will then hit Control E to drop the grid copy back onto the grid. It's called merge layers. And then I will increase my brush size for a moment, and then go like that to just sort of darken some of the lines so that you can have just bear with me. Right. So I'll get rid of the end 2 lines, delete, and then again clean up the edge. And then we have the beginnings of grid. Now you can go further with this if you'd like. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep going from where I am now. So now that you have the grid, what you're going to do is you're going to right-click on the layer and go Convert to Smart Object. Now what this does, it's a really cool feature in Photoshop, is if you double-click on it, you will open it up as a separate document. You notice if I tab through, or F, there's what we were just working on, and the grid, which is known as PSB. Now this is cool because, well, I'll show you in a second why it's cool. Actually, first off, I'm gonna rasterize the layer, which takes it away from from it being a smart object, and I'm gonna make it a little bit more of a square. In fact, I'm gonna make sure it's a square by selecting it with the square selection tool, holding Shift to make sure it constrains, and really quickly, I'm transforming it by hitting Control T. I'm gonna again select it, hold that Shift until I get just enough, invert the selection by pressing Control Shift I to clean it up, and then again we're going to convert it to a smart object. Now the reason why we convert it to a smart object is that if we transform it, you can change the size, right? Just like you're transforming normally, or shift it in, shift it bigger. But really cool is if you hold Control and click like a corner, you will move the individual points around like that. Now I'll get into why this is awesome a little bit further, but I just wanted to show off also why this is great. So smart objects specifically. So I will duplicate the grid, and then I'm going to rasterize this layer. And so if this is a normal layer, and we transform it, you notice that it doesn't have the X in the middle. And what that means is the same, if I wanted to get it back to normal, I'd have to kind of pull it out here and then eyeball it around a little bit, and it doesn't really work. However, if we go back to our normal grid, the one that's still a smart object, and hit T, then the bounding box of the original object are still there. And this is just great. So I'm going to go back for a second to where we were converted to a smart object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer twice. Take layer 2. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go into the duplicated layer, rename it, go into the smart object by again double-clicking it. Not that part, double-clicking this. So again, we're in the new layer. We're going to duplicate the layer that's already in there. Free transform. Actually, so when I free transform, I don't click the lines or anything. I click outside of it, and if I hold Shift, it snaps. So snap it to 90, and then merge down, save it, Control S, and then you notice that we have a square grid on top of it. So this is great. So then what we do, I'm going to turn off the one we started working on. I'm going to simply transform it, rotate it slightly, and then set it up as our ground plane. And depending on what you want in your perspective drawing, this can be any situation. Finally, with the original, the other thing is, I forgot, if they're named, you might have to do this process twice. You notice the original grid has these double lines here. That kind of sucks, but essentially, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to rasterize this really quickly. I'm going to go back in, duplicate the layer, rotate it 90 degrees, or just really fumble it. Hang on. Rotate it 90 degrees. Hit Enter to get out of free transform mode, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to merge down, which is E, save, close this, go back to our original grid, convert it to a smart object, and then so we have two things. So then I'm going to retransform it to fit our needs as a perspective grid. Just like so. I'm not going to waste too much time here. In general, it's good to try to keep the proportions about right. And then with our other grid thing, I'll free transform that as well. And this will be our z-axis, perspective grid for determining vertical lines. So I'm gonna line up the edges. Essentially, actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull this up and make sure that this lines up with that same square, because these are in the same grid, so it's helpful to keep them lined up. And then what I'm going to do is, since we're looking down on the object, it's going to get wider as it goes out. I'm going to get that perspective just about perfect, you kind of got to whittle it around. And then once that's there, if you move these boxes on the middle of the transform, don't hold shift, they will stay within that perspective that you have there. Furthermore, again, if you do that on the sides too, the same thing happens. It stays within it. You notice how the edges are automatically warping and transforming. It's really cool. So if you wanted to, they don't have to line up perfectly, essentially. And again, these are just basically guides. So, once those two are done, I'll usually make a folder, call it grids, and then I can adjust the opacity here so that they're a little bit lighter and they don't bother me so much. And then, with a new layer, you're free to start, make sure it's in the outside of the folder, you're free to start drawing and sketching within, that perspective, which, allows you to do all sorts of things and keep it looking cool. So yeah, so that's basically a perspective setup. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more, and see you next time.